The dangerous mission. Sarah had always known that being a medic in the interstellar war was not an easy job, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen. She was stationed aboard the Vanguard, a massive human battleship, on a mission to save lives, no matter the cost. It was a war against the ruthless Kargath, a deadly alien race that had been terrorizing human colonies across the galaxy. Sarah had seen her fair share of wounds, but the battles were getting fiercer, and the stakes were higher than ever. The Vanguard had just entered the atmosphere of a remote alien planet. The mission was supposed to be a simple rescue operation. The human colony had been under attack, and a distress signal was sent out. The Vanguard was their only hope. Sarah and her team were ready to assist, bringing their medical expertise to heal the injured and help the survivors escape. They were prepared for anything, or so they thought. As the Vanguard made its descent, Sarah sat in the medbay, preparing her equipment and checking on her team. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for nerves. She had trained for years, and now it was time to put that training to use. She glanced at her team, a group of experienced medics who trusted each other with their lives. There was no room for mistakes in a place like this. "Sarah, we're entering the atmosphere now." Lieutenant Davis's voice crackled over the comms, pulling her back to reality. He was the leader of the team, always calm under pressure. "Get ready. We don't know what we'll be walking into." Sarah nodded silently. She knew better than to get caught up in the nerves. She adjusted the straps on her medical gear and double-checked her supplies. Medkits, pain relievers, bandages, and emergency trauma kits. Everything had to be perfect. The team would need it all once they set foot on the planet. The Vanguard shuddered as it broke through the planet's thick atmosphere. Sarah looked out of the medbay's small window, watching the ground below grow larger with each passing second. It was a barren world. Dusty, rocky terrain, with dark clouds swirling in the sky. It didn't look like a place where anyone should be living, but the distress signal had been clear. The humans on the ground were in danger, and Sarah was there to help. The ship touched down with a loud thud, and the loud hum of the engines slowly faded away. Everyone stood still, waiting for the next orders. Sarah took a deep breath, preparing herself for what was to come. The mission was about to begin. The doors of the Vanguard opened, and the team stepped out onto the planet's surface. The air was thick and dry, filled with an acrid smell that made Sarah's stomach turn. The atmosphere was unwelcoming, but they didn't have time to worry about that. The colony was waiting for help. The first sign of trouble came quickly. As Sarah and her team made their way toward the colony's location, gunfire rang out from behind a rocky outcrop. Sarah instinctively ducked, her heart racing. She looked around quickly. The Kargath, the alien enemies, had found them. They were already under attack. "Move, move," Lieutenant Davis shouted, pushing Sarah forward as the team ducked behind a nearby boulder for cover. The sound of alien weapons firing was deafening, and Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She could hear the screams of her comrades and the harsh crackle of energy weapons as they met their mark. It was chaos. Sarah's training kicked in. She knew that panicking would only make things worse. As she looked over at her team, she could see the fear in their eyes. But they were soldiers, trained to handle these situations. The medic's job was to save lives, and that meant keeping a clear head. "Lieutenant," Sarah yelled, trying to make herself heard above the noise. "We need to get to the colony. That's where the survivors are. We can't stay here." Davis nodded and signaled for the team to move. They quickly rushed forward, dodging blaster fire and taking cover when needed. Sarah's mind was focused only on one thing: getting to the wounded and getting them the care they needed. She had to be ready for whatever came next. The closer they got to the colony's location, the more intense the fighting became. The Kargath were relentless, and Sarah knew they would not stop until they had wiped out every human they could find. The humans, however, were determined to survive. As they entered the colony's main area, Sarah could see the devastation. Buildings had been reduced to rubble, and the air was thick with the smoke of fires that had been burning for hours. The survivors were hiding in the remains of a collapsed structure, trying to stay out of sight of the aliens. Sarah's heart broke as she saw the conditions they were living in. It was a miracle any of them had survived. But there was no time to waste. Sarah immediately sprang into action, her medic instincts taking over. She moved quickly, assessing the wounded and giving orders to her team. There were burns, broken bones, and severe wounds from energy blasts. The team worked as fast as they could to stabilize the injured. Every second counted. But then, something unexpected happened. A loud explosion echoed through the colony. The ground shook beneath their feet, and dust filled the air. Sarah's stomach lurched. They had triggered a Kargeth ambush, and now they were surrounded. The team was trapped. In the distance, the figure of a Kargeth commander emerged, looming tall and terrifying. Sarah could feel her heart race. This wasn't just a skirmish anymore. The humans were in real danger. It was a fight for their lives, and she had to keep her team alive, no matter the cost. The situation was dire. The medics' worst nightmare was coming true. Their lives were at risk, and there was only one chance to survive. The question was, would they make it out alive? The hidden danger. As the dust settled from the explosion, Sarah's mind raced. The loud rumble had shaken everything around them. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her focus sharp. She scanned the area quickly, assessing the damage. The colony, once a bustling community, was now a war zone, and the air was thick with the stench of burning debris. Her team was still alive, but Sarah knew they couldn't stay in the open for long. Status report. Lieutenant Davis called, his voice cutting through the chaos. Sarah quickly ran to check on the nearest injured. A young soldier was lying on the ground, his leg pinned under a heavy piece of debris. Blood was seeping through the cracks of his armor. Without hesitation, she knelt beside him, pulling out a trauma kit and working as fast as she could. We need to get him stabilized. Fast. While Sarah worked on the soldier, she noticed something strange. The air seemed to be getting thicker, the ground beneath them starting to feel unstable. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it gnawed at her. It was as if the very atmosphere was shifting. As she finished securing the soldier's leg, she noticed a strange blue glow coming from a nearby crack in the ground. "What the hell is that?" she muttered under her breath. Before anyone could answer, the temperature suddenly dropped. A cold chill rushed through the air, causing Sarah to shiver despite her heavy gear. The feeling of dread intensified. The atmosphere was changing, and it was more than just the environmental hazards from the ongoing battle. Something wasn't right. "Everyone, keep your masks on," Sarah ordered, her voice filled with urgency. "There's something in the air here. We can't risk exposure." The team didn't question her. They knew Sarah's instincts were sharp, especially in situations like this. The team quickly adjusted their masks, but Sarah's gut told her that wasn't enough. Whatever this planet was hiding, they weren't prepared for it. Lieutenant Davis crouched next to Sarah, his eyes scanning the area. "What are you thinking?" "I'm not sure yet, but I feel like this planet is more dangerous than we were told," Sarah replied, glancing around nervously. "The atmosphere. It's not just the aliens we need to worry about. There's something else. Something toxic." Just as she said that, a sharp gasp came from one of her team members, Private Harris. He stumbled backward, his face pale, his hand pressed to his chest. "I can't," he gasped, struggling to breathe. Sarah rushed to his side, her heart racing. "Harris, stay with me." The private's eyes were wide with panic, and his breathing came in short, sharp gasps. "I can't breathe. It's burning." Before Sarah could react, the private collapsed to the ground, convulsing violently. She felt her blood run cold as she knelt beside him, frantically checking for a pulse. There was none. Harris was gone. "What just happened?" Lieutenant Davis asked, his voice thick with disbelief. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process what had just occurred. She quickly checked the air sensors on her suit. The readings were off the charts. The atmosphere on this planet was laced with a deadly toxin, one that affected humans instantly. Harris had been exposed to it for just a few seconds, and it had already claimed his life. "This planet's atmosphere is toxic," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the panic threatening to rise inside her. "We don't have much time." Davis looked around, his face grim. "How long do we have?" "Minutes, maybe seconds, depending on the exposure," Sarah replied, feeling the weight of the situation sink in. "We need to get back to the Vanguard and figure out a way to neutralize the toxin. If we don't, we'll all end up like Harris." The realization hit hard. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. They were now fighting against an enemy they couldn't see, and with every passing second, the danger grew. Just as Sarah started to organize her team to move quickly back to the Vanguard, a loud sound pierced the air. It was low at first, like a rumble, but then it grew louder, closer. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what it was. The Kargath, sensing their weakness, were preparing for another attack. They had no idea what they were dealing with, but they could sense that the humans were vulnerable now. "Ready yourselves," Davis shouted, grabbing his weapon and looking at Sarah. "We need to move, now." But Sarah was already thinking ahead. The team was in danger from more than just the Kargath. They were running out of time, and without a way to protect themselves from the toxic air, there was no way they could survive much longer. "Listen," Sarah's voice cut through the tension. "We have to find shelter first. There's no way we can fight the Kargath or get back to the ship without shelter from this toxin. Move fast, and don't stop for anything." As the team scrambled to find cover, Sarah's thoughts were racing. They were trapped in a deadly situation, with no clear path out. The Kargath were closing in, and the air was killing them. They had to find a way to survive, and fast. Every minute they wasted, every wrong move, could be their last. The fear was palpable in the air, but Sarah kept her head cool. She couldn't afford to let panic take over. Not now. The lives of her team, and the future of humanity, depended on what happened next. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far worse. The planet wasn't just a hostile environment, it was a trap. And they were already caught. The unexpected help. The situation was growing more desperate with every passing moment. Sarah's mind raced as she led her team toward the only shelter they could find, a half-collapsed building in the distance. The toxic atmosphere still weighed heavily on them, and the distant sound of Kargath soldiers closing in only added to the tension. The medic had never been in a situation like this before, where survival depended not only on her medical skills, but also on their ability to outsmart a relentless alien enemy in an unforgiving environment. As they ran, Sarah's eyes darted nervously around, trying to keep her bearings in the smoke-filled air. Every step felt like it could be their last. Her thoughts were focused entirely on the safety of her team, but something else gnawed at the back of her mind. The Kargath were smart. They knew they couldn't let the humans escape, and they would stop at nothing to make sure they didn't. The shelter was getting closer, but as Sarah looked back, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A small group of Kargath soldiers had spotted them. The aliens were swift and terrifying, their glowing eyes fixed on Sarah and her team. Their long, slender bodies moved with unnatural speed. Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her focus. "Get to the shelter," she ordered, urgency in her voice. Now. Just as the team reached the entrance to the shelter, the Kargath charged, closing the gap between them faster than Sarah thought possible. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as the first shot rang out. It missed, but only by inches. The aliens were getting closer, and there was no way they could hold them off. Their weapons were powerful, but Sarah's team was unarmed. They couldn't win a firefight. The team scrambled inside, but it was a narrow space, and the Kargath were almost upon them. Sarah pressed her back against the cold, cracked wall, trying to catch her breath. She had never felt so helpless before. Her medical training had prepared her for all kinds of emergencies, but not for this. And then, out of nowhere, a voice boomed from the shadows. "Hold your fire, Kargith." The voice was deep, commanding, and unmistakably human. Sarah turned toward the sound, her mind reeling. Who could possibly be here? They had been alone, surrounded by enemies. She thought it might be a hallucination brought on by the toxic atmosphere. But then, a figure stepped forward from the shadows, his silhouette framed by the smoke. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the same combat gear as Sarah's team, but his armor was far more battle-worn. He looked like he had been through hell and back. His face was hardened, his eyes cold with determination, but there was no mistaking the human spirit behind them. "Captain Grayson," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper in the chaos. "How did you?" Captain Grayson, a seasoned soldier from a special unit, gave her a quick nod before raising his weapon, locking his gaze on the approaching Kargith. "I was tracking you," he said, his voice calm despite the danger. "You thought you were the only humans here. You've got more enemies than you think." Before Sarah could respond, Grayson moved swiftly, taking down 2 Kargith soldiers with precise, expert shots. His movements were fluid, and his confidence was contagious. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting to win. The remaining Kargith soldiers hesitated for a moment, thrown off by the unexpected arrival. "Move," Grayson shouted, his voice carrying an edge of authority. "Get inside the shelter and lock it down. We'll hold them off." Without thinking, Sarah and her team obeyed, rushing into the shelter's interior. The building was mostly intact, but there was no time to examine it further. They needed to regroup and quickly. Inside, the team was trying to tend to the wounded, but Sarah couldn't help but feel a wave of relief wash over her. They weren't alone anymore. Grayson stepped inside, closing the door behind him just in time to block the Kargith soldiers from following. He turned and gave Sarah a grim smile. "I didn't think I'd find anyone left alive out here," he said. "Looks like I was wrong." Sarah nodded, still trying to wrap her mind around the unexpected rescue. "You're a soldier from the Vanguard." Grayson shook his head. "Not anymore. I was part of an advanced recon team sent ahead to scout this planet. But something went wrong with the mission. The Kargith ambushed us before we could finish our report. I've been hiding out here, waiting for the right moment to strike back." Sarah's eyes widened. "So you've been here alone, this whole time?" "Not alone," Grayson replied with a smirk. "There are a few of us scattered around, but I'm the only one left in this sector." He looked around at Sarah's team, his gaze sharp. "You'll need to move fast if you want to survive. The Kargith aren't the only threat here. I don't know what's going on with the atmosphere, but it's making us weak. You can feel it, can't you? The air is poisoning us slowly." Sarah nodded. She had noticed it earlier, but hearing Grayson confirm it sent a chill down her spine. This planet wasn't just a battleground. It was a trap, one designed to destroy them from the inside out. The Kargith were just one enemy. The planet itself was a far deadlier one. "We need to figure out how to neutralize the toxin," Sarah said, turning to Grayson. "If we don't, none of us will survive long enough to escape." Grayson studied her for a moment before nodding. "I've got some equipment stashed nearby. We'll have to make it quick, though. The Kargith won't give us much time." For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Grayson was right. They had a chance. But it wasn't going to be easy. They were up against 2 powerful forces now, an alien army and a deadly poisoned atmosphere. They needed to outthink them, both if they were going to make it out alive. "Let's move," Grayson said, snapping Sarah out of her thoughts. "And keep your eyes open. This isn't over yet." With a new plan forming in their minds, Sarah and her team braced themselves for the next phase of the mission. But one thing was clear: they weren't alone anymore. And that made all the difference. The enemy's secret weapon. The silence inside the shelter was almost deafening. Sarah and the rest of the team huddled together in the dim light, listening to the distant sounds of Kargath patrols searching for them. The calm, though temporary, gave them the chance to collect themselves. Their minds were still reeling from the deadly atmosphere that had taken Harris' life and the sudden arrival of Captain Grayson. But even as they caught their breath, a sense of unease settled over Sarah. They couldn't stay in the shelter for long. The Kargath were relentless, and now that they knew humans were on the planet, they wouldn't stop until they had wiped them out. Grayson's presence gave them hope, but Sarah knew that hope alone wouldn't be enough. They needed a plan, something that would give them a fighting chance. Grayson, who had been silently observing the team, finally spoke up. "We don't have long. The Kargath have a new weapon. And trust me, it's unlike anything we've faced before." A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. She could see the grim look on Grayson's face, the kind of expression that only came from facing something truly terrifying. The rest of the team exchanged nervous glances. "What kind of weapon?" Lieutenant Davis asked, his voice low and steady, though Sarah could hear the uncertainty there. "We've already seen their firepower. What could be worse than that?" Grayson shook his head. "It's not just firepower. The Kargath have found a way to weaponize the planet's atmosphere." Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? How?" "It's a device," Grayson explained, pacing in front of the team. "A weapon that creates an artificial energy field around the planet. It amplifies the toxic atmosphere, making it even deadlier. Anyone exposed to it for too long will suffer immediate respiratory failure. It's designed to break us down from the inside out." Sarah's heart sank. This was worse than she had imagined. The toxic air was already deadly enough, but to make it worse, to turn it into a weapon, they had no time to waste. They had to find a way to stop this device. "Where is it?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with urgency. "We need to destroy it. Now." Grayson glanced toward the entrance, listening for any sounds of movement. "It's located in a facility not far from here, but getting there won't be easy. The Kargath have placed heavy security around it. If we're spotted, it's over." Sarah felt the weight of the situation settle over her. The team was already weakened from the toxic air, and now they had to fight their way through Kargath forces to reach a facility filled with high-tech defenses. But there was no choice. If they didn't destroy the weapon, they would all die, slowly, painfully, suffocating under the very air they breathed. "Then we go in quiet," Lieutenant Davis said, his voice firm. "We take them by surprise." Grayson nodded, pulling up a map of the area on his wrist console. "The facility is heavily guarded, but I've been keeping track of patrols. We'll have a small window of opportunity when their shifts change. We'll have to move fast and stay out of sight." Sarah studied the map carefully, trying to mentally prepare for what lay ahead. "And if we don't make it in time?" she asked, the words leaving her mouth before she could stop them. Grayson didn't hesitate. "We don't have a choice. We'll make it in time." The plan was simple but dangerous. They would move under the cover of night, using the shadows to hide from Kargath patrols. Grayson would lead the way, using his experience as a soldier to guide them through the enemy lines. The rest of the team would follow, making sure to stay close and keep as quiet as possible. "We'll go in small groups," Grayson instructed. "We don't risk getting spotted. Each team will be responsible for taking down a key Kargath position quietly. We won't engage unless we absolutely have to. The mission is to destroy the weapon, not to fight them head-on." The team nodded, each member taking a moment to prepare. There was no turning back now. The Kargath had given them no choice but to act quickly, and they had to do it right. Time was their enemy. As they set off under the cover of darkness, Sarah's mind raced. She kept her eyes sharp and her breath steady, determined to stay focused. But despite her training, a gnawing sense of fear tugged at her. The Kargath were not just enemies. They were hunters, and they had been hunting her and her team from the moment they landed. The air was thick with tension as they moved through the desolate landscape. Every footstep felt like it could give them away. Sarah couldn't help but wonder if they were walking straight into a trap. The Kargeth knew they were there. They had to. It felt too quiet, too easy. But Grayson was right. They didn't have a choice. They had to destroy the weapon. They had to stop the Kargeth from using the planet's atmosphere as a deadly weapon. As they approached the facility, Sarah could feel the weight of what they were about to do. The weapon was close, and every step they took brought them closer to either success or failure. The Kargeth knew the planet's atmosphere was their ultimate advantage, and now it was up to humans to take it back. But something else gnawed at Sarah's thoughts. Grayson had been tracking the Kargeth for a long time. He was used to these kinds of operations. But what was he hiding? Why was he really on this planet? And would the weapon they were about to destroy really be the end of the Kargeth? Or was there something even more dangerous lurking in the shadows? As Sarah's team inched closer to the facility, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a far bigger battle than they had prepared for. The fight for survival. The facility loomed ahead, an imposing structure of jagged metal and glass that seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. As Sarah and her team approached, the weight of their mission settled even heavier on her shoulders. The Kargeth weapon was inside, and with every step closer, she could almost feel the poisonous atmosphere grow stronger. It wasn't just the air that threatened them now. It was the sheer power of the device they were about to face. Grayson led the way, moving with the confidence of someone who had spent years navigating hostile terrain. His eyes were constantly scanning the area, ensuring no patrols were nearby. Sarah stayed close, her heart pounding as the seconds ticked by. The Kargeth had no idea they were coming, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something much worse than just an alien weapon. "We're almost there," Grayson muttered, glancing back at Sarah. "Stay alert." The team moved in silence, the only sound the soft crunch of gravel beneath their boots. They reached a small ridge, and from there, Sarah could see the entrance to the facility. 2 Kargeth guards stood outside, their figures tall and menacing, scanning the perimeter with unwavering focus. 2 guards, Grayson observed, crouching low. "We'll take them out quietly. Once they're down, we can move in." Sarah's hands tightened around the medical kit strapped to her waist. It wasn't the kind of situation she was used to, treating wounds, stabilizing the injured. But it was the reality they were facing. She was going to have to fight to survive, just like everyone else. "Let me go first," she whispered to Grayson. "I have an idea." Grayson raised an eyebrow, but didn't question her. Sarah had earned his trust, and in a situation like this, trust was everything. She moved swiftly, her training taking over as she crept toward the Kargeth guards. The others followed, staying low and keeping to the shadows. As Sarah approached, she saw the perfect opening. One of the guards had momentarily turned away, giving her just enough time to strike. She reached into her belt and pulled out a small, compact device, a stun grenade. She didn't want to kill them, not unless it was absolutely necessary. The mission was too important to risk making too much noise. With a deep breath, Sarah tossed the grenade into the path of the guards, just as the first one turned back around. The device landed with a soft thud, and then emitted a powerful electrical pulse. The guards froze, their bodies convulsing briefly before they collapsed to the ground, unconscious. "Nice work," Grayson said, impressed. Sarah nodded but didn't let herself feel relieved yet. This was just the beginning. They still had to get inside and neutralize the weapon. The team rushed forward, moving quickly and quietly through the entrance of the facility. The air inside was thick with the faint hum of machinery, the walls lined with rows of alien technology that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly glow. It was unlike anything Sarah had seen before. The Kargeth had certainly outdone themselves in terms of building a stronghold. They made their way deeper into the facility, carefully avoiding any other Kargeth patrols. The layout was complicated, with narrow corridors and dead ends that seemed to twist and turn at random. Sarah's mind was constantly working, calculating the best path forward. She was the medic, yes, But in moments like this, she had to be more than just a healer. She had to be a strategist. "Where's the weapon?" she asked, turning to Grayson. He checked his wrist console, his expression tense. "This way," he muttered, leading them down a narrow corridor. "It's in a central chamber, heavily guarded. We'll need to take them out first before we can get close." As they reached the central chamber, Sarah felt her heart race. Through the transparent walls, she could see the device, a massive metallic core surrounded by alien consoles, flickering with energy. The weapon was enormous, far more advanced than anything the humans had ever encountered. It was no wonder the Kargath had been using the planet's atmosphere to amplify its deadly power. This device had the ability to turn the air toxic for miles. There were several Kargath soldiers in the room, their weapons drawn, standing guard around the weapon. The room was a high-security zone, but there was no turning back now. Sarah and her team were in the final stretch, and they couldn't afford to fail. "Grayson, we have to move in now," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "If we wait any longer, we risk losing the weapon and the planet." Grayson nodded. "On my count, we take them out." No hesitation. The team spread out, taking their positions as they prepared to launch the final assault. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. This wasn't just about stopping the Kargath, it was about saving humanity. If they failed, the planet would fall, and the Kargath would have the power to wipe out colonies across the galaxy. Grayson raised his hand, signaling for them to move. With precision, the team launched their attack. Shots rang out as they moved into position, taking down the Kargath soldiers one by one. It was a fast, coordinated strike, each team member hitting their target with flawless accuracy. Sarah's heart raced as she ran toward the weapon, her mind focused only on the task at hand. She couldn't afford to be distracted. The Kargath were retreating, but they were not yet defeated. Grayson had told them this mission would be hard, but now it was more than just about survival. It was about proving that humanity could fight back against any force, no matter how powerful. The closer Sarah got to the weapon, the more it seemed to hum, its power surging in waves. The Kargath had created something truly horrifying. But with every step, Sarah knew they were getting closer to victory. She reached the console that controlled the weapon, her fingers shaking with anticipation. There was no room for error now. She took a deep breath and began to work, desperately trying to override the Kargath's security systems before it was too late. The future of humanity depended on her success. But as she worked, a new sense of danger crept over her. Something wasn't right. The Kargath soldiers had been too easy to defeat, and the weapon's hum was growing louder, its pulse beginning to shift in a way that made Sarah's blood run cold. The device was powering up, faster than she had anticipated. And then a voice echoed from behind her. "It's too late. You've already lost." Grayson's face went pale as the words sank in. Sarah turned, and for the first time, she understood the full gravity of their situation. The real battle had only just begun, a heart-stopping moment. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "You've already lost." The voice came from behind Sarah, its cold, echoing tones sending a chill down her spine. Her heart skipped a beat, and her fingers froze over the console as her mind scrambled to understand what had just happened. Grayson's face was pale, his jaw clenched in disbelief. He turned slowly, scanning the room as if searching for the enemy. Sarah's breath caught in her chest. She had been so focused on the weapon, on stopping the Kargath, that she hadn't noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. It was as if they had walked straight into a trap that had been set long before they arrived. The sound of footsteps behind them made Sarah's blood run cold. They weren't alone anymore. The Kargath had been waiting. "Everyone, take cover," Grayson shouted, his voice urgent. But before anyone could react, a large figure stepped forward from the shadows, emerging from a hidden alcove at the far end of the chamber. The alien's silhouette was imposing, even more so than the others Sarah had seen. It was tall, with smooth, sleek armor that shimmered under the dim lights of the facility. But there was something distinctly different about this one. The creature's eyes burned with an unnatural intensity, glowing an eerie shade of red. It was the Kargath commander. Sarah's heart raced. The Kargath commander was known for his ruthless intelligence and devastating combat skills. The battle had already been hard enough, but this was something entirely different. They had underestimated the enemy. "Grayson, what's going on?" Sarah whispered, her voice tight with fear. This isn't supposed to happen," Grayson muttered, his hand hovering near his weapon. "The commander was supposed to be dead. We thought we had wiped out his forces months ago, but it looks like he was biding his time, watching us. We walked right into his trap." The commander's voice sliced through the tense silence. "You think you can stop me? You think your pathetic human efforts can challenge me? This weapon is far beyond your understanding. You should have stayed away." Sarah's mind raced. The Kargath had been hiding something all along. This was no ordinary weapon. It was more than just a tool of destruction. It was part of a much larger, more terrifying plan. The commander was the key, and now he was in front of them, standing between the team and their only hope of survival. Grayson's voice was low, filled with a mix of anger and regret. "We never should have come here. The Kargath knew we'd find the weapon. And now it's too late." The commander raised his hand, and the hum of the weapon in the center of the room grew louder, more menacing. The energy was surging, faster than before. Sarah could feel it, a tingling in the air that made her skin crawl. The Kargath had been waiting for this moment, the final activation of the weapon that would turn the tide in their favor. "We don't have much time," Grayson whispered. "If that device powers up fully, it'll wipe us all out." The weight of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She could feel the heat rising in the air as the weapon continued to charge. The atmosphere was growing thick, too thick, as if the very air was being sucked out of the room. It was the same toxic atmosphere that had already killed Harris. Now, they were all at risk. The Kargath commander laughed, a low, menacing sound that echoed through the chamber. "You will all die here, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. The planet is mine, and soon the galaxy will bow before the Kargath." Sarah's chest tightened. This was it. They had come so close, but now it seemed like the end was inevitable. The team had fought so hard to get here, to destroy the weapon, to save humanity. And yet, they were standing on the brink of annihilation. Grayson's hand tightened around his weapon, his face hardening with resolve. "We're not done yet." He turned to Sarah, his eyes locking onto hers. "We need to destroy the weapon, no matter what. You're the only one who can do it. I'll hold the commander off. You take out the power core." The weight of his words hit Sarah like a wave. Her heart pounded, but she didn't hesitate. She knew what she had to do. The team's survival, humanity's survival, rested on her shoulders now. If she failed, it would all be over. Grayson moved quickly, drawing his weapon and stepping in front of the Kargath commander, blocking his path toward Sarah. The two of them exchanged a glance, a silent understanding that this battle would not be won by force alone. Sarah had to act. She had to get to the core, disable the weapon, and end the Kargath's reign of terror. Sarah's mind cleared as she sprinted toward the weapon. Her hands were shaking, but she knew she couldn't afford to waste time. Every second counted. As she reached the central console, her fingers flew over the controls, desperately trying to access the shutdown sequence. But just as her hand hovered over the final command, the lights in the room flickered. The temperature spiked. The Kargath commander was closing in. A voice called out from behind Sarah, a cold, dangerous whisper. "You can't win. You never were meant to." Sarah's heart raced, her breath coming in short gasps. The commander had caught up with her, but she couldn't afford to stop. She had one chance, just one chance. With a final, defiant push, Sarah hit the button. The weapon's hum abruptly stopped. The room plunged into silence. The air, once thick and choking, seemed to lift, as though a weight had been lifted from the planet itself. The Kargath commander's eyes widened in disbelief. No, it can't be. But it was too late. Sarah had done it. The weapon was disabled. The Kargath had lost. Grayson, now face to face with the commander, wasted no time. He moved with deadly precision, taking the alien down before it could make another move. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was eerily quiet. They had won. But Sarah knew this was only the beginning of the battle. The Kargath were relentless. They had only just begun to fight back. And she had a feeling that this would not be the last time humanity faced such a threat. The final victory. The silence that followed the destruction of the weapon was deafening. Sarah stood motionless for a moment, trying to comprehend what had just happened. She had done it. The Kargath's planet-shaking weapon had been disabled, but it wasn't just the technology she had stopped. It was the turning point in a war that had been raging for years. Her hands were still trembling from the adrenaline, but her heart was slowly beginning to steady. The air felt different now, lighter, less suffocating. It wasn't just a physical change. The weight of the entire mission had been lifted from her shoulders. Grayson stood over the fallen Kargath commander, his face grim. The fight wasn't over. The commander might have fallen, but the war wasn't won just yet. Sarah knew they had barely scratched the surface. The Kargath were fierce, relentless. Even with the weapon destroyed, the enemy still held vast resources across the galaxy. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The humans had won this battle. And in that victory, there was a message that humanity was capable of standing up against even the most impossible odds. Grayson turned toward Sarah, his expression softer now, as if the weight of their shared struggle had momentarily lifted. "We did it," he said, his voice low but filled with respect. "We actually did it." Sarah nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. It wasn't a victory that would change everything, yet, but it was a start, a victory that would echo through the universe. The humans had faced impossible odds, and they had overcome them. Against a toxic atmosphere, a ruthless alien species, and a weapon that could annihilate them all, humanity had fought back. They weren't just surviving. They were proving something. Behind them, the facility slowly began to collapse. The shockwaves from the weapon's deactivation were beginning to destabilize the entire structure. Sarah turned quickly, motioning for the team to move. "We've got to get out of here now." The team didn't hesitate. Grayson led the way, with Sarah and the others following closely. The sound of crumbling metal and exploding machinery filled the air as they sprinted toward the exit. The Kargath forces were still a threat, but they were no longer the true danger. The danger now was the collapse of the very ground beneath them. If they didn't move quickly, they'd be buried in the ruins of their victory. They raced through the crumbling corridors, their boots pounding against the floor. The tremors were growing stronger with each passing second. Sarah could feel the panic rising, but she pushed it down. They were so close. She could see the exit ahead, the open sky just beyond the broken doors. "Keep moving," Grayson yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We're almost there." With every step, Sarah's heart pounded harder. The facility was falling apart, but they couldn't stop now. They had to make it out, had to survive long enough to see the consequences of their actions, to see if humanity had truly won, or if this was just one small victory in a much larger war. The final stretch was in sight. They were almost there when suddenly, a loud roar echoed from behind them. Sarah whipped around to see a Kargath soldier charging toward them, its weapon raised. But it wasn't fast enough. Grayson spun around, his gun already raised. One shot. The Kargath soldier fell,